Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Revolutionary War Rarities, the podcast from the Sons of the American Revolution. Today is episode 1 of a 3-part series entitled West Florida. This series is endorsed by the Florida 250th Commission, as well as the Alabama 250th Commission, and we are proud to have their endorsement for this series. In this series, you will learn about the 14th colony of West Florida and the role it played in the American Revolution, from Mobile Bay and today's Gulf Islands National Seashore to Pensacola, the capital of West Florida, to the Big Easy, New Orleans, Louisiana, and the role it played in West Florida, up to Natchez, Mississippi, and most areas in between. We welcome you to Revolutionary War Rarities and to the stories of West Florida, the 14th colony. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Revolutionary War Rarities, the podcast from the Sons of the American Revolution. My name is Jim Griffith, and I'm happy to have a very special guest with us today. His name is Mr. Mike Bunn. Mike, welcome to Revolutionary War Rarities.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
All right, so here's why Mike is here. We are starting today a 3-part series on the 14th colony. Now, a lot of people would debate what that 14th colony actually is, and we're going to discuss that in a moment with Mike. But Mike is also the author of this book, The 14th Colony, The Forgotten Story of the Gulf South During America's Revolutionary Era. And I happen to be blessed enough to have an autographed copy of this. Mike, thank you for that.
Glad you have it. Hope you enjoyed it.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an outstanding book and very, very educational. You know, Mike, one of the things I was going to say is I think a lot of people, when they think of the American Revolution, they don't think of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana as being a part of the American Revolution. But in fact, it was a part of that.
Oh, definitely. That area that you just mentioned, about half of Alabama, southern half of Mississippi, portion of Louisiana, portion of Florida, were part of a 14th colony called West Florida. As I joke about when I do presentations, it's not necessarily that I'm referring to a sequential founding, because there were more than even 14, but we are so accustomed to hearing the word or the number 13, and we know that's the complete number that rebelled and formed the United States. All I'm saying is that there's more to that story, and we on the Gulf Coast, that we are that more to the story, or at least one level, because there were more than 13 colonies, and West Florida was one of them. And I just wanted to bring that story to light in the book and just help people understand what
Sure.
its existence really was all about.
So, who else has claim to that title, 14th colony?
Well, several places would probably make some allegation to having a claim on it. I think the most direct competitor for that title is the colony of East Florida, because East and West Florida were founded at the exact same time. And again, when I talk about it, when I do my presentations, I say, look, I say West Florida's 14th colony because I wrote the book first. Because there's a gentleman who wrote about East Florida, but his came out 2 years after mine. So therefore, West Florida is 14th. But in all seriousness, East and West Florida were founded at the exact same time.
What about Quebec? Would they qualify?
They could qualify. A number of other places that could qualify. At the time of the American Revolution, in North America and in the Caribbean, you had a total of over 20 British colonies, and anyone could probably have some assertion that we're the 14th colony. All I say when we talk about the 13 versus 14 is simply, I'm just saying there's more to the story. And so that I think that our story is more directly related to what happened in the rest of the revolution, and therefore I think there's a stronger case to be made that one colony, they really wanted to be part of the revolutionary effort, and there were still Revolutionary War battles that played out on its territory, was West Florida. So I think that we've got some other things going for us to say that this really is a forgotten aspect of the revolution that really deserves a little bit more attention than it's previously received.
So let's talk about how the 14th colony, West Florida in this case, came into existence.
It all had to do with the ending of the 7 Years' War, which was an international war fought between France and Great Britain and their respective allies, and basically France lost the war. So France is removed from North America as a colonial power as a result of the treaty ending that war. They had to cede a lot of land, and Great Britain acquired a good bit of it. Now there was some exchange with Spain, so it gets a little complicated. But for the purposes of understanding how West Florida came about, remember that Great Britain's territorial claims extended just a short distance inland at the time of that war from the East Coast. As a result of it, they acquired a huge swath of land in the center of the continent, including most of the area where of the Gulf Coast where the colony of West Florida would be founded. So once they did that, Great Britain immediately annexed or created a new colony or two new colonies in the Gulf Coast area called West and East Florida. And that's 1763. So that is the beginning point for the colonial story that I try to tell in the book.
Okay, very good. Now, let's talk about the specific boundaries. And I know that changed a little bit a couple of years later. So talk to us about what West Florida boundaries looked like.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned they changed because I always refer to original boundaries versus complete boundaries. So, as originally designed, the colony of West Florida extended from the Mississippi River on the west to the Apalachicola River on the east, Gulf Coast on the south. The northern boundary is what changed. The northern boundary was at first the 31st parallel. 31st parallel is a line that's still with us on modern maps. It's the line that separates southeast Alabama from the Florida Panhandle and a portion of Mississippi and Louisiana. So that's the first time that boundary came into existence on maps as an international boundary of sorts. Now that was 1763. As soon as British authorities got into the region and went about the process of setting up the colony, they immediately requested that authorities in London allowed them to extend that boundary further north. There was no competing European power there that they had to worry about. Some of the best land in the colony was actually north of that area. You know, the immediate environs of the Gulf Coast are generally not the best agricultural land in the region. And all these rivers that drain into the Gulf all course through there. And so they eyed a more expansive province than had originally been designed on paper. And ultimately, there was a compromise made. Some of the local authorities wanted to extend the border all the way up to where Tennessee is today. And the authorities in London ultimately agreed to kind of meet them halfway. And so they extended it in 1764, the next year after the founding, to the 32nd parallel, 28 minutes, which sounds very arbitrary, but basically that's where the Yazoo River entered the Mississippi. It's where the hills of Vicksburg are today. If you're familiar with Vicksburg National Military Park, it's a pretty
Absolutely
obvious spot that you didn't need a lot of complicated understanding of the geography to locate. And so if you look at that, basically and drew a line from where that boundary was on the Mississippi all the way over to the Chattahoochee, you're going through Jackson, Mississippi, Montgomery, Alabama, on to Columbus, Georgia. So you can appreciate that's fully half of Mississippi and Alabama. So that's the colony's borders in its fullest extent.
Okay. All right. So in Mississippi, Interstate 20 that runs from Vicksburg to Jackson, then it goes across to Meridian, but it kind of starts tilting north a little bit and across Alabama. So from Mississippi's perspective, it would be Interstate 20. Alabama, then it would be a little south of Interstate 20.
Yeah, Highway 80 goes across a good bit of Alabama that would kind of roughly parallel that border. So basically, you're talking about just about exactly half of both states. That's the fullest extent of the territory, and that's the boundary that would remain in place all the way until this colony eventually became a Spanish colony.
Okay, very good. So talk to us about what life was like in that territory. I grew up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, which is about 60 miles off the Gulf, which would have been contained within West Florida. Very hot, Wonderful place to grow up, but very, very hot. Mosquitoes the size of birds. Lots of snakes, rattlesnakes, alligators, etc. So I have an idea of what life was like, but that was also when I was growing up, not back in the 1700s. Talk to us about that.
Well, as you mentioned, the climate was a major consideration of life. It was something that influenced everything that the people did there, and people were coming to try to make a living off the land. And so there were certain areas that had relatively good soil where you could grow a variety of marketable crops, and a search for a cash crop was a constant theme in West Florida's history. Most people were sort of small farmers in general. There were obviously some wealthy people that were doing things on a larger level, but your average West Florida settler is living on a small plot of land, growing some subsistence crops, trying to raise cattle and hogs, and try to excel the excess in these villages that are springing up all around the colony. It's a subtropical environment, and it's a very important factor to understand the difficulty of life there, because as the British discovered when they first arrived here and tried to begin the process of setting up government, they arrived in the early fall, which is the absolute worst for mosquitoes and how easily things like yellow fever can be spread. They arrived right at the beginning of hurricane season. They got introduced to a host of maladies in this environment that they had no experience with. And so the very first impression of a lot of the British leadership of this colony was that it was nothing but, as one of the leaders, Robert Farmer, said, nothing but a graveyard for British people. This was not recognized as a healthy environment for a lot of people who were new to the Gulf Coast. This was, of course, way before air conditioning and those sorts of things. It was difficult to get around, so it was a little bit of a true frontier environment that was a little bit rugged, and you have to put yourselves in their perspective to understand what life was really like there. This was a place that had very few roads, little communication with the outside world, no regular communication, even by water, with other British colonies. And the people here perceived themselves truly to be on the ragged edge of civilization as they knew it. So it is definitely a place that you have to come and create something. There is nothing that you're just going to walk into and administer. This is a colony that had to be developed almost from scratch.
So, what about Native Americans? Challenges with them?
Obviously, there's a good bit more Native Americans living in the larger region claimed by Great Britain than there were British people. At any given point, the entire population of the British colony of West Florida prior to the Revolution would have been something like 2,500 people, all told, that would have been considered uh, uh, residents or citizens of a colonial, of a British territory. The Native Americans, meaning the Creek and the Choctaw, to some degree even the Chickasaw and Cherokee, that would have had some interaction with some of that territory, easily outnumbered them on the order of 20 or 30,000 to 2,500. So relations with Native Americans were absolutely paramount for the survival of the colony. Now, the Choctaw and the Creek had a good bit of experience working with the native or with European nations by this time, and areas along the Gulf Coast such as Mobile and Pensacola had already been thoroughly settled, so they didn't walk in and just take native land. Those were lands that had already been granted or agreed upon prior to that. But the in order for the colony to grow and develop, they realized that those hinterlands, the interior, where that land was so good and the rivers flowed, most of that was still thoroughly under the control of Native Americans, who both welcomed and had some questions about the new colonial power that had come to their territory. Native Americans had a lot of experience trading with European powers by that time. These are primarily no longer people that are fashioning their own weapons and creating all of their pottery and things like that. They still have those skills, but they have found for a long time before British got there that Europeans had access to really well-made iron and other iron tools and guns and weapons and cloth and all kinds of things that made native life better. So they were prepared to work with these people, to trade with them, because they knew the British had demonstrated they had the best supply of these things. And the British very much wanted to work with them both for diplomacy and also to take advantage of what the natives had, which was deer skins. And there's a thriving deerskin trade that takes place in the colonial era, where thousands, hundreds of thousands of deerskins are being sent out of the ports of West Florida and other ports in the region back to Europe to be manufactured into all manner of things that we think of that's primarily just leather today. So hats, gloves, book bindings, etc. So there's a mutual economic interest in this time period, and that mutual economic interest sort of guides the diplomacy between the two groups, and for the most part ended up being sort of mutually advantageous for that little window of time. Now, fast forward in time, and the natives, their products are no longer going to be quite as marketable in a generation to the Europeans, and the Europeans have even more power and authority and are desiring even more land. So that dynamic is going to change. But during the period that the Gulf Coast was under British control, 1760s into 1770s, that economic trade is what was the glue that held these two groups, that kind of worked to keep them close together, and it was an agreement and a relationship that both thoroughly enjoyed and worked to enhance.
One last question about this on this particular episode. What do people eat in West Florida?
Well, if your average settler living in West Florida would have obviously taken advantage of the resources of the natural environment that we're blessed with, the waters, the rivers, plenty of fish. If you live closer to the Gulf, you got oysters and all kinds of other things that you could easily harvest. You've got deer and a variety of other animals that people hunted, including squirrels. But as far as vegetables and things they grew, they're growing fruits and vegetables, a lot of that are very familiar today. You know, there are people that were growing peaches and all manner of berries and fruits, and they're growing corn. One of the things that they grew in considerable quantity that was a part of the diet and a part of trade that we don't associate with the Gulf Coast is chickpeas, stuff you make hummus out of. They were growing that, and they were growing a variety of other things. So everything from radishes and cucumbers, tomatoes. I mean, these people were doing a lot of the farming that would be familiar with us today, with a few variables from the time period that you might not think of.
Okay. Anything else that you want to add to the boundaries or life within the 14th colony?
Well, just that when you look at the boundaries, to the north would have been just strictly native domain, so there's not an immediate European power to the north. To the east would have been British possessions of East Florida, and further on would have been Georgia. To the south, you've got the Gulf, and so you've got a few boundaries that may be slightly more complicated than you might assume because of the way that the Gulf Coast runs in Mississippi and Louisiana. The one big thing to remember is that just to the west, though, there's a foreign power. Louisiana is controlled by the Spanish during this time period, and that will ultimately work in some ways to the benefit of the colony in its first years, and then ultimately to its detriment once the Revolutionary War breaks out.
Okay, perfect. So, as we mentioned, this is a three-part series. The next episode will be on the revolution within the Deep South, or the 14th colony. And then the last episode will be the impact of the 14th colony, the impact of the revolution on the 14th colony, maybe what it would have looked like had we not won the American Revolution. So we are celebrating 250 years of this great nation and the impact that the 14th colony had on that. And if for those listeners, those people that are watching, this is a great book. It's a great reference manual. A lot of detail in this, Mike. Great job on this book. I'm thankful that you were able to do this and put this information together for all of us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Okay. Well, we will see you again, as well as a gentleman named Val Crofts from Montevallo, Alabama, also the American Village is where he's employed. He'll be joining us for the next several episodes, but I thank you for being here. I thank all of our listeners for being here. Hope that you'll join us again in several weeks for the next episode of Revolutionary War Rarities. This has been a production of the National Society, Sons of the American Revolution, www.sar.org.
In 1776, a spark ignited.